I'm Mike East, and the reason I want to do this tape, and my friend Dr. Reynolds from Bryan, Texas, is helping me with it. He's doing the taping, is because uh, I want to tell some of the story about the East Foundation and how it came into existence and who was responsible for getting it there, and my satisfaction, dissatisfaction with them because of the way it's being operated. And I feel like the wishes and the values of the family and my uncle, who was who was the main person involved in getting this foundation established, is not the foundation not portraying the values or the wishes of either the family or my uncle, either one. First of all, him and my aunt both expressed to me why they wanted to do the foundation, and the reason was it was too much land for the family to inherit, and they wouldn't have had the money to pay the estate taxes on it, and would have probably wound up having to sell part of it. So they wanted to set it up as a wildlife foundation where there would never be any hunting on it, and that the family could lease it back to run cattle on. And they also both expressed to me that they wanted the monies to go for cancer research. And neither one of those scenarios has taken place, even though I have expressed my displeasure and wishes to the CEO, Mr. Neil Wilkins. And that's why I want all of this to go on record. So I'll have to go back in the time to show how we arrived at this point now. And another one of the displeasures that I have with them is that in the end, and I'll get to all of that, but I don't want to go into a lot of detail. But at the end of my Uncle Robert's life, this lawyer, Paul Price, who was the main orchestrator in getting this foundation formed, in November 16th of 2006, had my uncle, and by that time my uncle was incapacitated, had him sign a lot of documents where some older members had been taken off. There were amendments made to the old foundation. I'm sure there was documents that were suppressed, and he appointed new trustees to this foundation. And from what I understand, my uncle didn't want to sign any of these papers, but they wore him down. And in these signatures, anybody that wishes to see the signatures can see them, because they should be recorded in the courthouse, and it's just initials that aren't even legible. And he just signed all this stuff so they just leave him alone. And that wasn't the worst part. After he signed all this, then he wasn't getting proper medical help till the family was notified that they didn't feel like he was getting proper medical help. And this lawyer is on the payroll of the Wildlife Foundation, and I have expressed to the people in charge that he needs to be fired because of what he did to my uncle. It was criminal. And I'm not the only one that feels that way, but they still have him there. So anyway, let me go back in time as to how we got to this point. We'll go back to 1943 when my grandfather passed away. Prior to that, prior to 1943, beginning in 1935, it was my grandmother, my grandfather, my father, my Uncle Robert, and my Aunt Lisa. There's three children. And at that time, my father was was the administrator of most of the operations. My grandfather had backed off and let my father take a leading role in running the main ranch. And he had my grandfather had my uncle taking care of the smaller operations on the side. Anyway, when my grandfather passed away, my uncle decided that he wanted to be in charge of the office at Hebronville, and he wanted to take my father's role and run the main operation. So my father relinquished his responsibilities and took over what my uncle was doing and let my uncle take over the main role of running the main operation. Anyway, after a period of time, my uncle never went to the office, and so the office was getting behind, so my father went ahead and took that over. And then through the process, they wanted, and my grandmother wanted to get out of the King Ranch. And they wanted, for their interest in the King Ranch, they wanted land instead of money. So that was in the 50s. So that finally came to pass, and after my grandfather passed away, the three siblings, Tom, Robert, and Lisa, formed a partnership called East Brothers. And so the Santa Fe Ranch was given to the East Brothers for their interest in the King Ranch. So they were out of the King Ranch and they got the Santa Fe Ranch. And then through the years, a lot of the original ranch called the San Antonio Viejo, that is now in the East Foundation, had lease properties that they leased adjacent to it, and my father was the one that negotiated and bought a lot of these properties, and they added it to the ranch itself. So he was a businessman of the three, and he was the one that made it prosper and grow. Anyway, he passed away in 1984, December 8th of 1984, and through the years, my uncle always felt like he was in his brother's shadow, and when my father passed away, he told me that he was going to run all of it, and I was going to take orders from him. Well, my father had left us his third in the partnership. But the problem being that even though he left us his third in the partnership, we had no authority to sign checks or anything on the partnership. So when I expressed to my uncle that I would be glad to work with him, but I felt like I needed to make my own decisions uh, in operating Santa Fe and not be directly under his thumb, because we were under a lot of debt at the time, because we were going to have to pay estate taxes on what we inherited from my father. And he said, well, he told me, if it's going to be that way, well, I want to just partition, and y'all keep your third, and my sister and we'll take our third out, and we'll operate separately. And I tried to put him off, but since we couldn't sign checks on the partnership, we couldn't pay our bills, so they refused to sign any checks. So we had to come to the table and get this worked out, because we didn't have any money to operate on if they weren't going to sign any checks. We couldn't meet payrolls, we couldn't pay for ranch supplies, etc. So we wound up partitioning, and the partnership owned 300,000 acres of land, so they got 200,000, we got 100,000. To make up their 200,000, 30,000 had to come off of Santa Fe to make up their 200,000. So all that was accomplished. And then soon after that, I remembered my dad always telling me that it was normal and it was also okay for families to fight, but once the fight was over, they had to remember they were family, and they had to all get back together to be family again. So 2 weeks after our fight, I went to them, and as far as I was concerned, we were family again, and we had a good working relationship during this time. Then in 1993, somewhere in there, my aunt was diagnosed with breast cancer, and she started taking treatments and everything for it. And during this period of time that she was sick, she was expressing to my sisters and I, and my mother and me also, what she would like to see done. And she called a meeting, and she met with my mother and my sisters first, and then I wasn't able to go, so I met with her later. She expressed to me that she wanted us to have certain properties, as much as they could leave us, her and my uncle, as much as they could leave us, that we would be able to pay the taxes on, and the rest she wanted to put into this wildlife foundation, where we would lease it back from the foundation and to run cattle on. And she also wanted, because of her situation with cancer, she wanted some monies donated for cancer research. So she not only wanted the wildlife foundation, in conjunction with it, she wanted a charitable foundation set up. So anyway, we talked about that, and I just listened. I didn't express anything to her one way or the other. And when she was talking to me, she was showing me the heirlooms that was at their house at Hebbronville, and they had things from Captain King's time, the china and furniture in the house. And she was showing me, and she was showing me the dates, from the 1800s. A lot of these things were from the 1800s. And I guess she was showing me this so we could try to preserve it, or whatever. I don't know. I don't know why she was showing me this, but she was. Anyway, she passed away suddenly, and she got sick at night, and my uncle drove her to the hospital at Rio Grande City. Well, she passed away by the time they got to the hospital. So my uncle calls me on the way to the hospital, and then I'm on my way out there, and by that time we had some sort of cell phones, not like they are now, but they were already around. The sheriff from Starr County in Rio Grande City was calling me that I needed to get there because they were having trouble with my uncle. So I got there as quick as I could, and my uncle was very distraught when I got there, and he didn't know what to do, and he wanted to take her home, and I told him, I said, Robert, I said, you can't take her home. Well, he insisted that he wanted to take her home, and I said, Robert, we have to make other arrangements for her. We can't just take her home. She has to go to a funeral home and all that, and then make funeral arrangements. Then he remembered that I guess my aunt had told him in case something happened to call a fellow by the name of Marty West from Kingsville. So Robert said, we need to call Marty. And I said, okay. I said, let's call him. So we got a phone number and called him. Well, he had all the instructions. My aunt had already given me all the instructions, what she wanted done. She wanted to be buried right there at the ranch, graveside services, and then she had the spot picked out, and then she wanted my grandfather was buried in Kingsville. She wanted him moved out there to the ranch and put in that same plot. And then whenever my uncle passed away and my grandmother, she wanted all of them there. So we got all that done, and during the funeral, or before the funeral services, my uncle expressed to me, he reiterated everything that my aunt had said about the properties that he wanted us to have, about the putting it in the foundation and all that. It was just exactly the same words that my aunt had told me. And I told him, well, Robert, we can discuss this at a later date. I don't think this is something we need to really talk about now. Let's get my aunt buried and all of that, and then, then after it's all over with, then you can do whatever you think you need to do. So we did all of that. So time went on, and I happened to be working cattle over there on the coast at Sarita, and I get this phone call from Robert's lawyer, Buster Adamy, saying that Robert wanted to disclaim 90,000 acres of my aunt's property to us, but that Robert would be in total control of it till he passed away, and whenever he passed away, then it would come to us, and all of that. And I said, well, give me a little more detail. I'm not sure I quite understand what we're talking about. And he said, well, that Robert had gone in there, and I think there was a time frame where you could do a disclaimer, and if you went too long, then that window would close. And I think we were pretty close to the window being closed, and that's why we were rushing to get all these documents signed. That was the only reason for that. And anyway, Buster said that my uncle went in there and wanted to will these properties to us, and all of that, and he named them. He called them the Moolah, which was 35,000 acres, part of the Santa Fe. He wanted me to have it, and he wanted me to have the Buena Vista, which was another small ranch. It was 14,000 acres. And then he wanted my sister Alice to have the Lytton, which joined the ranch at Hebbardville, San Antonio Viejo. And he wanted my sister Lisa to have the Santa Rosa, which is up there by Rivera, that they have bought. And I think that's 20,000 acres. Anyway, Buster told Robert that that was good, but if he willed these properties to us, and then if we didn't have the money to pay the estate taxes on it, we would have to wind up selling it. So he said there was a better way. He told my uncle, he said, there's a better way. He said, you can disclaim 90,000 acres undivided of your sister's property, and you pay the taxes on it, but then when you're gone and they get it, there won't be any taxes because you disclaimed it to them, so there's only one set of estate tax to be paid on it. And that way they'll get it free and clear. And he said, in the meantime, you'll have total control of these properties. Nobody can tell you what to do, or they'll be limited partners. You'll have all the say-so in it. And it'll be like you still own them. So he agreed to it. So we had to get all the signatures in before a certain time, and I was the last. Everybody had signed it but me, so I was over there working cattle. So I met Buster Adamy and his secretary at the overpass out of Kingsville. I forget the name of the highway, but it's the highway that goes into 81 going to Benavides. And there's an overpass there, and we met under the overpass, and I signed what I had to sign. And that was it. And Buster said, he said, now you need to thank Robert for this, because it was really generous on his part to do this. So y'all be sure and thank him. So I called Robert up the next morning, thanked him, told him I had signed the documents, and thanked him. And he said, well, he thought it was the right thing to do, and it was a good thing to do. And I said, okay. And after that, I just put everything on the back burner. I never told anybody. I didn't tell my wife, Cassie, at the time about it. I didn't say anything to anybody. I didn't think it was anybody's business. And 2 weeks later, my uncle called me, and he tells me that he did some things that he wished he hadn't, and he wanted to change them. And I didn't know what he was talking about, so I said, okay, Robert, if you did something you're not happy with, I think it needs to be changed. Well, what he was talking about, I find out, is that he wanted to undo this disclaimer. And I asked my lawyer about it, and the lawyer, what he told me was that was fine, but whenever you undid the disclaimer, it had already been filed in the courthouse, and we're talking about 90,000 acres. Y'all will be giving this property back to him So somebody has to pay a gift tax on it. And I said, well, how much would the gift tax be? And he said, well, the gift tax would be about $9 million, which we didn't have at the time. So that created a problem. So I had several meetings with Robert after that to see how we could resolve this. And all the meetings were amicable and all of that, but he wouldn't budge from his, that he wanted this, everything put back like it was. He wanted this disclaimer undone. And by that time he had fired Buster Adamy because he got mad at Buster Adamy and claimed that Buster had tricked him into signing something he didn't want to sign. So Buster was fired. He hired this firm from Corpus, whom had represented him in a partition lawsuit. So he hired it was a tax lawyer by the name of Paul Pearson he hired. And of course Paul Pearson comes in and he says, well, we can have a friendly lawsuit and all of that. And I met with Paul Pearson and Robert over this, how we could resolve this disclaimer. And I told Paul Pearson that I had never experienced a friendly lawsuit or any of that. And anyway, what Paul Pearson was proposing made no sense to me to do. And so time went on, we were talking and everything, and then I happened to notice, she's my ex-wife now, but my wife at the time was, I was doing a lot of work at Sarita, and she was, I noticed she was leaving real early in the morning, coming in late at night, and I didn't know, I had never seen her be so energetic as she was then, and she had a saddle, a riding saddle in the back of her car and all that, and she had one of the hands going with her that worked here at the Santa Fe ranch. So this went on for about a week, and she'd be too dressed up to be working cattle anyway. I said, Hannah, I said, where are y'all going every day? He says, oh, we're going over there and helping your Uncle Robert work cattle, but I'm not supposed to say anything. And I said, oh, really? So, prior to this disclaimer, she never had anything to do with Robert, Uncle Robert. All she did was make fun of him. And as soon as she finds out that he and I are having problems, well, she gets in the middle of it. And that really complicated everything, because before that, Robert and I were trying to work things out, and then she gets in it, in the middle of it, and everything's complicated because, and by that time, there wasn't anything left to our marriage. I was just biding time before, she and I went separate ways, but it was just the idea that my uncle allowed her to come over there and influence him, try to influence him against me, that rubbed me the wrong way. So, and what set, what really complicated things was on her birthday weekend, she was gone, and she told everybody she was going to the island, and I find out that she wasn't at the island. She was out there at Uncle Robert, spent the weekend out there with him, because my grandmother by that time had caretakers and nurses and everything taking care of her. And my sister, my youngest sister Lisa, had called out there to see check on my grandmother, and the nurse gave her a rundown on my grandmother, and then told her that Kathy had been out there all weekend, and that Paul Pearson happened to call out there and looking for Robert, wanting to talk to Robert, and she told him that Robert wasn't there, that him and Kathy were out there looking at horses or something or other, and Pearson told Robert, or she told the nurse to tell Robert to call him as soon as he got in. So Robert called Pearson, and Pearson told Robert that if he wanted to prevail in this disclaimer dispute, that he needed to get her out of there. Well, I don't think he got her out of there, but I think it got to be more discreet. So anyway, I find out all this. I didn't care about her going to the island or meeting whoever she was going to meet out there, but I did care about going out there and meeting with my uncle. That did set me off. So I got mad about that, and it hampered my efforts to try to talk to him anymore on a one-to-one basis to try to resolve this disclaimer. So consequently, everything was turned over to the lawyers, and we wound up in a lawsuit over this. And so this disclaimer's lawsuit was going on, and at the same time as the disclaimer lawsuit, I had a divorce lawsuit going on. And I think she told him, well, she knew which buttons to push where my uncle was concerned, and she told him that I mistreated animals, and told him that after, and I know this because it was in the divorce lawsuit, in her deposition, it came out that she told him that when I came back from signing those papers under the underpass, that I had said that I had that old SOB where I wanted him now. And I never said anything like that. And if I had, I sure as hell wouldn't have told her that, because I knew how she liked to agitate and stir things up. So anyway, with deposition, the disclaimer depositions were taken, and Robert's deposition was taken, and one of the things that came out in Robert's deposition, or two in this disclaimer lawsuit, two of them that came out was where he reiterated again in his deposition that he loved his family, that he wasn't as estranged from his family and as people claimed him to be, that he wanted to set up this wildlife foundation, but he wanted us to lease the property and run cattle on it, and that he wanted monies to go for cancer research. All that was reiterated again in his deposition, even though he was mad, or we were all mad over this disclaimer lawsuit. So everything was settled. We to try to protect ourselves from the IRS, we, we did some exchange of minerals because the minerals in the partition, the minerals were undivided. And so we did an exchange of that where at Robert's death, we could exchange the minerals from Santa Fe for the ones at San Antonio Viejo or vice versa. Or vice versa. And and then we were given because Robert had all the executive rights on the minerals on all on Santa Fe, on San Antonio Viejo and everything. So we got the executive rights on Santa Fe. And as far as the mineral exchange, at that time, whenever he passed, it seemed that it was most likely that the best prospects for mineral well, obviously that's the minerals we wanted, whether it be at Hebbronville or it be here at Santa Fe. And then we would get the moolah. We would be able to keep the moolah. Everything else would go back to Robert, all the other properties. We would get the moolah at Robert's death. And let me see. Oh yeah, and he had to put up $2 million in escrow in a bank somewhere in case the IRS came back and wanted, it was to protect us from having to pay any taxes, the gift taxes, in case the IRS came back on us. It was to be there for a certain number of years, and if there wasn't any repercussions from the IRS, then he would get that money back, Robert. And so all that was agreed to and signed and done, and then we agreed that we would never contest any of Robert's appointees or will or anything he decided to do with his property. And the only thing we didn't do, and I didn't think about it, I felt like the lawyer at the time that was helping us should have thought about it, but he didn't, Charles Urey. We didn't protect Buster in this. And I never dreamed that they would go after Buster, because Buster hadn't done anything wrong. He was just trying to help Robert draw up the best possible will that he could for Robert and everybody else. So we didn't put any protection in our agreement for Buster. So as soon as we settled our part, then they went after Buster. Robert's lawyers did, and tried to have Buster Adamy disbarred. And I think Buster wound up settling with him, or his insurance, malpractice insurance, wound up settling with him, and Buster was really hurt throughout this because everybody knew Buster was an honorable person. He passed away. He's my age, and through all this, in Buster's case, Tony Canales from Corpus defended Buster in this malpractice lawsuit. So, and all the other difficulties that I had with Robert, after it was over, the fight was over, we would always go, we went back, or I made it a point that we go back to being family again. This time it was more difficult because of my ex-wife role in it. So, I don't know, 2 or 3 years went by, and my grandmother passed away. The disclaimer lawsuit was in 1995. My grandmother passed away in 1997, and I know in 1997 when I went to my grandmother's funeral, my uncle and I were still not on speaking terms. And she went, she had, they had graveside services for her, and I wouldn't even go in the house where my uncle and my grandmother lived at the time. I wouldn't even go in there. I was still hurt over what went on between them. So we were still, I guess, still estranged. And so time goes on, and then Paul Pearson, he's doing blowing and going and drawing documents up for Robert and all that, and then he's on the treadmill trying to keep himself healthy, and he has a heart attack and dies. And in that firm, there was another tax lawyer. Paul Pearson was a tax lawyer. There was another tax lawyer by the name of Paul Price. And he takes over Paul Pearson's role. Then, soon after that, then Buster Adamy has a massive heart attack. And he dies. So that goes on, and then Robert hires this man to help him run the ranch. He starts out helping him on weekends. He's a river rider that was born there on Roberts, and his name is Oscar Osuna, and he's just helping Robert on weekends. And then my wife now, Letty, we meet, and I met her sometime in 1995, or latter part of 1995, when the disclaimer lawsuit was going on. We met and all of that, and it turns out that her and Oscar were cousins. And Letty's grandfather had worked out there for my grandfather, and my father had worked for my father and also worked for Robert. And her uncle worked for my grandfather, and one was a foreman, and the other one was right under him. Her uncle was a foreman for my grandfather and my father, and then her grandfather was right under him. He was kind of the segundo, or the second in command. So slowly my feelings towards my uncle started mellowing out, so I decided, well, my uncle's not a real sophisticated person and all of that, and I feel like Kathy just conned him and wormed her way in there so she could try to feather her own nest. That was her only interest in my uncle, and I should blame her more than I do him. So I think it's time that we make amends and start a relationship again. So it happened to be his birthday. I don't remember what year it was, but it had to be after 1997 when my grandmother passed away. And it was his birthday, and it was already late at night, so we took a mariachi band out there and played music for him, and he was asleep when we got there, but we played music, and we I introduced him to Letty, and we kind of reestablished a friendship again. So, then after that, then after that, Oscar all of a sudden he quits his job, his main job, and all of a sudden he's working out there for Robert. He's working full time for Robert, and we start noticing that there's people that have been there a long time. All of a sudden they're not working there anymore, and there's talk around and that people they feel like Robert's being taken advantage of, and sometimes I'd have people come to me with rumors, and I thought, well, they're probably just jealous because Oscar's got this. Robert's never really had what you might call a foreman, because he always wanted to do everything himself. They're probably just jealous of Oscar because he's in this new role with Robert. So I took everything that was told to me with a grain of salt. Then my son Johnny tells me that he's friends with this doctor son that used to be our family doctor, that this doctor's son told Johnny, my son, that he thought there was a problem out there with Robert because Dr. Pena had said that this lawyer called from Corpus and wanted this Dr. Pena to say that Robert was in complete control of his faculties because they wanted to make some changes in his will. And Dr. Pena told this lawyer that he couldn't do that because in his expert opinion, he didn't feel like Robert was in complete control of his faculties anymore. So, and then after Dr. Pena told them that, well, they quit taking Robert to Dr. Pena anymore. I don't know what they did, but they quit taking him to Dr. Pena after that. And Johnny told me this, and I said, well, I've been hearing rumors. I said, but I think it's just, people are just jealous. I think that, you know how people are, they're just talking out of it. I really don't think there's anything going on that shouldn't be going on. So, time goes on, and then all of a sudden, then the landline, you can't get through anymore on the landline out there at the ranch at Everville. You call and you get busy, like the phone's off the hook or something. And so it's getting harder and harder to communicate with Robert. And then I used to go out there and see him every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every birthday. I'd go out there and see him. And this particular Thanksgiving was coming around, and I think it was on a Wednesday. I was trying to call out there to let Robert know that I was coming to see him, but I couldn't get through. And Rogelio Garza, who happened to be Robert's local lawyer and friend, gave me a phone number, a mobile phone number I could call. And it happened to be the cook that worked in the kitchen. And I called out there and I told him I'm going to come see Robert the next day. And he said, well, does Oscar know you're coming? And I said, no, have you told Oscar you were coming? I said, no, I never had to tell him before. Why should I start now? And he got real nervous, and he said, well, did you tell the girl you were coming? I said, what girl? He says, oh, you know, he says, Oscar's girlfriend. I said, no. No, I never talked to her in my life. Why should I tell her either? And I said, yeah, you just tell Robert that I'm coming to see him tomorrow. So, an hour later, Oscar calls me and he tells me that Robert don't want me coming out there on Thanksgiving. And I said, well, Oscar, if Robert doesn't want me coming out there on Thanksgiving, I said, he's going to have to tell me himself because I'm going. So that was the end of that. So I show up out there on Thursday, and Robert's not there. Oscar picked him up and hauled him to Hebronville. But I waited anyway. Well, they wound up coming back, and when they came back, at that time Robert was still able to get around on his own and everything, but I could tell that he was that he wasn't real lucid. I could tell that he hadn't said anything to anybody about me not coming because he didn't act like he knew if he was coming or going. He seemed to be just a little bit out of it. So anyway, Oscar left, and we stayed and had lunch. And Robert said, well, let's go back to Mama's room. And I said, okay. Well, I guess they must have moved the TV back. I don't think Robert had but one TV in the house, and then put it over there in my grandmother's room. I don't know why, but that it seems like that was the place to go watch TV. So when we get to her door, he knocks on the door and he says, Mama, you have a visitor. And I don't say anything. Then there's no answer, and he says, Mama, you have a visitor. And I said, well, Robert, she's not here anymore. He said, well, where is she then? And I said, well, I imagine she's in heaven because she's not here anymore. He says, oh, that's right. So we go in there and sit down, and he has the TV on, then he starts talking, and then he starts crying, and he starts telling me that these people, they're making him so mad because they treat him like he's crazy. And I don't know what he's talking about. These people just treat him like he's crazy. And I tell him, well, Robert, I don't pay any attention to those people, whoever they are. They're the ones that's crazy. Just don't pay any attention to them. And every time I'd get up and walk out there, I wanted to get up and go use the bathroom, he'd tell me, don't leave, don't leave. And I tell him, well, I'm not leaving, I'm gonna go use the bathroom. So I stayed there with him till he fell asleep in the chair. And then I got up and left. Well, what I didn't know at the time, when he was telling me that these people were crazy, and I'll take you back to when we started this video, when Paul Price made all these changes that he was talking to Dr. Pena about making, I find out later where there were probably documents suppressed, there was amendments made to the foundation, I don't know how many amendments, and the trustees would not be held accountable for anything. It was a document basically written by a lawyer for the benefit of a lawyer. And what I didn't know at the time, that I was sitting there with Robert in Thanksgiving of 2006, was that these documents were forced on Robert November 16th of 2006. And that's when he had to sign them, and that's why he was telling me on Thanksgiving that these people treated him like he was crazy. They just badgered him to get him to sign stuff that he probably didn't understand or read or anything else. And he finally just signed them so they'd leave him alone. Because that was just 2 weeks later that I was sitting with him from November 16th. All this was November of 2006. All this took place 2006. And those documents, Oscar Osuna was made a trustee of the Wildlife Foundation. Carilu Cantu was a trustee. That was Oscar's girlfriend, who used to be Robert's girlfriend. Now she's Oscar's girlfriend. And the gate guard. These three people were made trustees. And Paul Price was a lawyer that drew up these documents. He was a lawyer that, however he did it, I don't know how, but he convinced Robert that these documents needed to be signed. And then Oscar Osuna was to get $500 million upon Robert's death, inheritance. And Oscar got Robert's power of attorney. Not only got power of attorney that he could sign checks, he got a durable power of attorney. He could make medical decisions for Robert. So all that happened November 16th of 2006. And the reason that I think that Paul Price wanted Oscar Osuna, of course Oscar Osuna wanted it, and his girlfriend and the gate guard, because they had neither one of them had any qualifications to be trustees for a trust decides that Robert was going to leave, or a foundation, or whatever it was. But I think that Paul Price wanted these three individuals to be trustees because he would be able to control them. And that's why he wanted them, because there had been other trustees, and they were all, and then November 16th of 2006, all those people were just kind of swept aside. So anyway, I leave there after Robert goes to sleep. I just wanted to give some background as to why Robert was crying and why he said that those people treated him like he was crazy. So we left there, and then soon after that, my son Johnny comes to me again and tells me that his mother, my ex-wife, had been out there and had her friend with her. Her friend was some kind of physical therapist, and that while they were out there, because my ex-wife's friend was supposed to be giving Robert some kind of physical therapy, and that the boy that was taking care of Robert at the time expressed to her that the family needed to look into Uncle Robert's condition because things weren't right for him out there. So Johnny came to me with it, and again, I was still, I guess I'm pretty dense, I was still convinced that it was just rumors. And I said, I think they just probably stories that going around, people are mad at Oscar and the same old spill. And Johnny said, well, he said, you need to call this Ramiro, that was the caretaker's name, and I have his phone number, you need to call him and talk to him. He said, that's all I ask you to do. And I said, well, Johnny, I said, I don't, even if I call him, I said, I really don't know what to do. I said, why don't you do something? And he said, well, I wouldn't know what to do. He said, but I want you to call this Ramiro. So I didn't know Ramiro, but I called him, and he said yes, that there was a lot of times that Robert needed medical attention, and they refused to take him to the doctor, and that things weren't right for him. That he wasn't getting the care that he should be getting. So I said, well, I'll go out there. So Letty and I went out there. We made our trip out there, and we saw Robert and everything. By that time, he was pretty much bedridden. And I said, Robert, I said, why don't we go to the doctor? He said, I don't need to go to the doctor. And I said, well, will you go if I take you? And he said, yeah. He said, if you take me, I'll go. So we decide we're going to take him to the doctor the next day. Well, by the time the next day comes around, they already have, Oscar tells me that that Robert already has a doctor's appointment. So I said, okay, well, we're still going to go. So we leave the ranch out there with Robert. We wind up in McAllen and meet Oscar and Cuddy Lou there in McAllen, and we're following them. And we get to this imaging center, and so I go in with Robert, and there's this lady doctor there. Her name is Dr. Jetta Brown, and apparently they had already been taking her around taking him to her or her out there, I don't know which, but because she already knew all about Robert and everything, and I see an opportunity. I think, well, maybe if I talk to this doctor about them getting nurses, professional nurses to take care of Robert, it will solve a lot of these medical issues. So I said, Dr. Brown, I said, you don't know me. I said, but I'm Robert's nephew. And I said, as his next of kin, I would like to see my uncle have some nurses around him. And she looked at me and she said, well, she said, you might be his next of kin. And Oscar was standing there, but she patted Oscar on the shoulder and she said, but this man, you may be his next of kin, she said, but this man has your uncle's durable power of attorney. So in other words, my suggestion would not mean anything because I had no authority anyway, because this man Oscar already had his durable power of attorney. And I thought, well, I guess there's no use in me even trying to do anything anymore. If Oscar has the durable power of attorney, I have no say so. So I told Oscar, I said, Oscar, that time I decided, well, maybe I should confront Oscar with it. I said, Oscar, I said, you know that Robert needs nurses. Why don't you get him some nurses? It's not like he couldn't afford them. And he said, Robert doesn't want any nurses. And I said, Oscar, I don't think that's right. I said, Oscar, Robert would love to have nurses around him, especially if they're pretty. And he said, no. He said, Robert doesn't want nurses. Well, later on I find out that they tell Robert not to let anybody get him any nurses, because if he allows people to get him nurses, they'll put him in a nursing home. Those nurses will suggest that he go to a nursing home, so he needs to say no to nurses and just let the people at the ranch take care of him. And I think the people at the ranch were doing as good as they could with what knowledge they had, but they didn't know anything about medicine, what to take, when to take it, or how much was too much, or anything. They couldn't take his blood pressure, or temperature, or anything else. Most of them were just laborers. So I left there, the imaging center, with a bad feeling, and I did some checking on Jetta Brown. I find out she doesn't even have a practice. She does house calls, but she doesn't have an office. She doesn't have a practice. That's why when they took Robert, they knew I was going. They took him to this imaging center, and I also find out that her biggest role in life is being, she is a licensed doctor, but her biggest role has been testifying against other doctors in malpractice suits. So that's who they had taking care of Uncle Robert. And I think I need to infuse something in, break this chain of conversation a little bit, just infuse something in. But, and the disclaimer, when we got the executive rights, we got Exxon to release a lot of property that they weren't drilling on or trying to explore or anything. And when they released it, we leased some of this property out to another company, and they hit a big gas field. And this gas field was so big that at one point, because Robert had 2/3 of the mineral interest because it was still undivided, but he was getting $1 million a month out of this gas field. And over a period of 10 or 12 years, whatever it was, that money had really built up. So here's this multi-millionaire with a doctor that's the expert witness in malpractice suits, taking care of him. After November 16th. So let's go back to our story. Robert goes back to the ranch and all that. I have a horse show coming up in Fort Worth, so Letty and I go up there to it, and while I'm up there, I get a call that this other man that checks on Robert, that's an employee there too, and he'd been giving me information all along. Ramito, after I our talk on the phone, he's been giving me information. Well, I find out while I'm up there in Fort Worth that Jetta Brown has been moved to the ranch to be Robert's primary doctor. Her and her husband are moved out. So much for her practice. And she's been there a week or two, and this Lalo, this employee, tells me that he thinks Roberts has had a stroke because his mouth is crooked. So I tell Lalo, well, that I'm out of town, but as soon as I get back home, I'll be out there to see about him. So as soon as we get back, Letty and I go out there, and Jetta Brown's there, and she has this IV bottle hanging over the bed, and it's got big letterings on it, stencil on it, says expired. And that's hanging over his bed, and of course we questioned that right away, and she says, oh, she just uses that to threaten him that if he doesn't eat, she's going to give him this IV. That's to threaten him. Okay. Well, what about his mouth being crooked? And she said, oh, that was a fall he had, a horse fall, broke his jaw. And I said, Dr. Brown, I said, that happened about 60 years ago. I was there when it happened, and his mouth wasn't crooked after that. So our relationship didn't get any better there than it started out at the Imaging Center in McAllen when I first met him. So Letty starts talking to her and asking her if she needs, because Letty's a nurse, if she needs this or that or the other. And Jetta Brown gives her a list of different things that she needs. So we leave there, and Letty goes and gets all these shopping for all this stuff that Jetta Brown gave her, and the next day or the third day we go back out there to take all these things, and when we get there, Dr. Brown tells us, when we first get there, I walk in the dining room, because you go through the dining room to get to Robert's room. I walk in there, and there was a big piece of furniture that came off of Captain King's steamboat, where Captain King's picture was always there on that piece of furniture, and then there was some silverware up there and stuff. You can see it when you walk in there. Well, first thing I noticed in that dining room is that Captain King's picture is no longer up there. What's up there is a picture of Cassie up there. And that didn't sit well with me, because I knew Robert hadn't put it up. He didn't put it up there because he was bedridden by that. Do you need a recess? So, anyway, we get there, and Dr. Brown tells us that Robert is got atrial failure. I guess that's a condition where your heart's beating too fast or something. And she's gonna send Oscar to town to bring some medicine to take care of these atrial fib. I mean, it's a shot. She's supposed to give him this shot and get his heart back in rhythm. So we know that's going to take an hour or so, or two. So we figure we'll just sit around and wait. And And in the meantime, she starts talking to us and telling us that she has read Robert's directive, that Robert has, she tells us that Robert doesn't want to live anymore, and she's read his directive that he doesn't want to feed him tube, and that he just wants to die. And I tell her, well, I don't believe that because I haven't seen the directive, and until I see that directive, I'm going to withhold my judgment on that. And then I suggested that we could get Halo Flight to come in there and fly him to a hospital if we needed to. And she says, oh, they won't admit him. They won't admit him. And I said, well, I don't know why they wouldn't admit him. Well, she just insisted that he wouldn't be admitted and she wouldn't think of doing that. And Letty tells her that we have a defibrillator in the car. And she said, well, she wouldn't even dream of using a defibrillator on it. So this goes on, and then I find out later that she has no hospital privileges anywhere in the valley where she's supposed to practice. So that's probably why she's telling me that the hospital wouldn't admit him. So we're sitting there waiting, and the longer we wait, the more I think about that picture of Cassie being up there and Captain King's picture not being there, the madder I get. And it's already gotten dark, and Oscar hadn't showed up yet. So I asked Ramito, I said, Ramito, when's Oscar going to show up? And he said, well, he's not going to come till you leave. And I said, well, how will he know when I leave? And he said, well, she'll call him whenever you leave. And I said, okay. So Letty and I get in the car and we drive off like we're leaving. It's already dark, and we go park somewhere and hide till we see Oscar come in. So he comes in, we go back up to the house, and when Oscar's in the house, I stop him there in the living room and I confront him about the picture up there. And I told him I thought it was pretty disrespectful of him to take Captain King's picture down and have Cassie's picture put up there in place. And he said, well, he didn't do that. And I said, well, but you're supposed to be the man in charge. You allowed it to happen. And he said, no. He started making excuses. So I guess we must have got pretty loud or something, because Letty came in and told me that we just needed to go. So we left. We left that night. Well, then we left, and then the next day or something, I called Ramito, and he tells me that he understands that the lawyer's supposed to go out there. Paul Price. Okay? So I told my sisters, I said, I think it'd be a good idea. I think that lawyer's going to be out there at Roberts. I think y'all should go too. It just, like it's go pay Robert a visit. So they go, but when they get there, Paul Price is already there, so they have to wait outside. And there's two other men there waiting outside, and they didn't know who they were, but one was Fausto Salinas, and the other one they called Weddle, that owned a farm and ranch store in Rio Grande City, and they didn't know what they were doing there. But we find out later what they were doing. So they wait and they wait and they wait and they finally just go in, decide to go in, and Paul Price is in there and Oscar and everybody's gathered around Robert's bed, and Paul Price, when they walk in, he tells them that they need some privacy there. And my sister Lisa says, well, we just came in to tell Robert bye because we came to see him. We can't get to see him because it seems like he's busy. So anyway, what happened, the reason Paul Price was there, because Ramito taped it. He got it on tape. He was there trying to get Robert to sign this document that he drew up where I would be barred from going in the gate to see Robert anymore. And I've heard the tape recording. And by that time, you can't understand anything that Robert says, but in the tape recorder, you clearly understand when he says, no, Paul Price was, Robert, would you sign this so your nephew can't come in the gate anymore? And Robert says no. And he says it 2 or 3 times. He says no. And at the end of the tape recording, Paul Price says, well, he says he's not going to sign anything today. We'll have to do it at a later time. So let us pray. And then he goes into this prayer and he's thanking the good Lord for Jetta Brown. He's telling Robert that Dr. Brown is making him better, making him well, making him better. Thanking the good Lord for Oscar and for Carrie Lou Cantu, for all they're doing for Robert and this, that, and the other. And then you can hear when my sisters go in and Paul Price says we need some privacy. And my sisters, you hear them say, well, they're just going to tell Robert bye and all that. So all that's on tape. And what that shows is the pattern that they used on Robert to get him to sign because they sign all these other documents, because there's 30 minutes of badgering, and he's already told them no once, but he's got to do it 2 or 3 more times before they finally decide that he's not going to sign anything today. And the 2 men that were outside were the witnesses to everything that was signed November 16th. Those 2 guys were out there waiting for the document to be signed, and then they were going to come in and sign on as witnesses. That's what they were doing. And so after that, and in that tape recording, something else that it said there was that they tell Robert that they want him to sign this because somebody needs to be there when Letty and I go out there, because the previous time we were there, we tried to kill him because we were going to shock him. And what they were talking about was when Letty told Dr. Brown that she had the defibrillator in case they needed it. And that's on tape. They told him that if they wanted him to sign this document saying that we couldn't go in there for his own protection because we might kill him. If there's nobody there, we just go in unannounced and there's nobody there to watch him. So, even though he didn't sign that document, we never got to go through the gate again because the gate guard was one of the trustees and he had orders. We went back, or I did. I went back a week later and I took my 2 sons and Alejandro Diaz with me, and we went back a week later, and when we got to the gate guard would not let us through the gate. And he called Oscar tell him we were there. And Oscar told him not to let us go through the gate. And then I said, while you have him on the phone, you ask him why we cannot go through the gate. And Oscar told him because the lawyer said you couldn't go through the gate, Paul Price. So, that was the last time for a while that we were able to go through the gate. So I'll go back to Huey and tell him what's happened and everything. And he said the only way we're going to solve any of this is in the court, legal action. And I said, okay. Well, let's do this. So Yuri thinks that because of the settlement agreements we signed during the disclaimer where we would not contest or anything, any of Robert's appointees or anything like that, we need to also have other family members involved in case the judge says that we have no standing because of that legal agreement we signed. So I got Ms. Groves in on it, and I got Tress Clayburg in on it. There were two cousins, and both of them were one was Robert's first cousin, the other one was his second cousin. So they were involved. We got them in on this, and then Rogelio, Robert's other lawyer, or he wasn't a lawyer at the time anymore, just a friend, I guess, advised me to get Tony Canales in on it because he was a big-time litigator in Corpus Christi, and he was still upset over what Pearson's firm had done to Buster Adamy because Tony Canales and Buster Adamy were real close, and they tried to have Buster disbarred, and Buster wound up having a heart attack later, so the Tony's still mad at that. So we decide we're going to try to have the Robert's old accountant appointed as Robert's legal guardian, so there's a hearing in Hebbronville, the first hearing. And there at the first hearing, all these lawyers were there. Tress's lawyer, Ms. Groves' lawyer, and Oscar's got his lawyer there, and of course Price is there, and Price was that firm, Branscombe PC and Corpus, which was a big time firm, and had lots of lawyers in it. So Price and 4 or 5 of his colleagues were there. They were all there. Price had already, as soon as he found out there was legal action being fired, he wanted to cut a deal. Called Tony and told him he wanted to cut a deal, and Tony told him there wasn't going to be any deals cut. We're going to court. So we all wind up there at Hebbronville, and then as you can imagine, with that many lawyers, nothing was going to get done as far as resolve that one time. It was in district court, and the judge wanted all the lawyers to agree on something, and it was about 20 lawyers, and there was no way you were going to get 20 lawyers to agree to something in one day. They all had different agendas, and all I wanted was to be able to get in the gate, see how my uncle was doing. The only thing they did resolve there was Jetta Brown had to go, and they got Dr. Falcon from Rio Grande City to take over as Robert's caretaker, but that turned into another problem. It didn't alleviate Robert's medical condition. in the least, because Dr. Falcone was, even though he's a very competent doctor, was listening. He really didn't. He just sent a nurse in there to look after Robert, but he really didn't see him that much, and he was listening too much to Oscar's side of the story. And can you cut it off a minute? No. Okay. We were at the first hearing when we started legal action, and I want to make a comment that I just thought about. Once we started legal action, I didn't hear it, but I was told that once legal action was started, Price told Robert's caretakers, whatever y'all do, don't let this man die. All of a sudden, he's worried about Robert's health and him dying. When he was trying to get Robert to sign that document and keep me out, he was telling Robert how well he looked at what a good job Dr. Brown was doing for him. Then legal action starts, and he says, whatever y'all do, don't let this man die. So we get to the hearing, our first hearing in Hebbronville. Chris Huff, this retired game warden, I hadn't talked about him at all, but he was game warden at the time. He was there. I couldn't figure out what he was doing there, but he was there. And Paul Price had, we were trying to get Carlos Martinez as Robert's legal guardian, and Paul Price wanted Ron Davidson as Robert's legal guardian. Both these gentlemen had been trustees, but they were removed in November of 2006. November 16th of 2006, they were removed to appoint Oscar Osuna, Carilu Cantu, and Canales. Mr. Canales is Robert's trustees or the wildlife trustees. I don't remember. Canales, not to be confused with Tony Canales, the lawyer. This was the Canales gate guard. I don't remember his first name, but his last name was Canales. So that was our fight, and so Ron was their choice for legal guardian, which we felt that they put Ron in there, things weren't going to change, would still be in the same boat. So we needed somebody in there that was going to look after Robert's interests, not their own, or that we felt would be looking after Robert's interests medically instead of their own interests. And at the time, we felt like Carlos would be the best choice for what we wanted. And then the Jetta Brown, they sacked her, and she got out of Dodge, and we all agreed that Dr. Tony Falcone from Rio Grande City would be okay. Problem being that Dr. Falcone would pretty quickly approached by Oscar, and Oscar told him what bad people we were, and that he needed, whenever he went out there, he needed to have a guard with him, an armed guard. So Dr. Falcone would go out there with a Texas Ranger because he was afraid of the family, or afraid of Robert's family. And where Dr. Falcone made a mistake, first of all, was listening to Oscar, and then the night caretaker for Robert was Garilou Cantu's nephew or friend or somebody. It was somebody from their camp that they put in there at night, and then the daycare nurse was a lady that Dr. Falcone got in there, and I think she was fine. I think she was doing a good job. And by that time, we had gotten Ramito out of there because they figured out that Ramito was the one that was leaking too much information out, and things got hot for him. So we told him he needed to get out of it, which he did. We did get him out, but we still they never had figured out that Lalo was also leaking information to us. And Lalo would tell us that the problem was that Dr. Falcone would come in, or if not him, his registered nurse would come in, and the day caretaker, the nurse would be there, and the night caretaker would be there. And the day caretaker, being Dr. Falcone's lady that he appointed there, would express her concerns that Robert wasn't eating, and that she was worried about him, and that she would tell the night caretaker about it, and that he would tell her that's because he eats all night. That's why he's not eating during the day. But she would look through the trash, and there wouldn't be any signs of leftover. There wouldn't be any sign of any leftover food or any leftover formulas that elderly eat, and that concerned her. And that was the same story that Dr. Falcone would get, and then I guess he was believing it, Dr. Falcone was. But many, many times this lady expressed that concern to both the registered nurse and to Dr. Falcone. And of course I was hearing it, and it was worrying me. And it seemed to me like time was of the essence for somebody to get in there as quickly as they could to check on Robert and get him medical help. And out of the blue one day, this Texas Ranger by the name of Robert Hunter called me from Laredo, and I don't know why this man called me, and I don't know who put him up to calling me or anything, but he told me that he would be willing to go out there and make a welfare check on Uncle Robert. And I told him I thought that would be a good idea, and gave him directions how to get there and so on and so forth. He calls me from Hebronville an hour or so later and tells me that it's not necessary for him to go out there after all, because on his way out there he stopped by there in Hebronville, and Chris Huff, the game warden, told him that it was not necessary for him to go out there because Robert was doing fine. And I told him I don't think that's right. I don't think he is doing fine. And Ranger got put out because I told him that, and he told me that he'd been a Texas Ranger long enough to know when somebody was lying, and that Chris Huff was an honorable man, there wasn't any reason to lie, and so on and so forth. So I thought that there wasn't going to be any use in arguing with this Texas Ranger, so I just let it go. But that's where Chris Huff starts coming into the picture. And keep in mind that I mentioned he was at that hearing. that first hearing in Hebbronville. So I'm thinking that this legal stuff is okay, but it's taking too long for Robert's benefit. Robert didn't have that luxury of waiting. And so a week later, we have another hearing, and this one is in San Diego because it's in district court. And Dr. Pena is there because Jerry got him to go because he wanted him to testify about this lawyer calling him and wanting him to say that Robert was in control of all of his faculties. And when Dr. Pena said that he was not in control of all of his faculties, that they quit using him altogether. And but Dr. Pena never got to testify because Tony wanted to depose or get Paul Price up on the witness stand, and then there was another. Ron Davidson by that time decided that he really didn't want to be be Robert's legal guardian after all, so he backed out, but he wanted $90,000 for his troubles. So the judge granted him $90,000 for his troubles of trying to be Robert's legal guardian. And this $90,000 come out of Robert's bank account. Or it wasn't his estate because Robert was still alive. So Tony got Price on the witness stand and put him through the ringer, and Price didn't have any good answers for Tony at all. So when he come off the witness stand, I asked Price, I said, well, how do you like it? And he said, well, he didn't like it at all. He didn't like what was going on at all, and he meant this legal stuff that was going on. And another thing of consequence that took place in this hearing at San Diego was that one of Price's colleagues got up because there was a lot of people at the first hearing not related to the case, but all interested, or friends of the family, and some were friends of the family, others were wanting to, just curious. And this colleague of Price got up and said that Robert was a very private person, so he felt like anybody that had no direct relationship to the case needed to step out of the courtroom. And the judge granted him that. What I say that this lawyer could have cared less about Robert's privacy. What he didn't want was the general public to know about this scam they were involved in, or this scandal they were involved in with this old man that was dying. That's what they were worried about. They didn't care about Robert's privacy. They didn't care one iota about it. So, anyway, that's about all that got done. So now, that's 2 weeks. So then we have to wait another week, and then we're going to go back and the third hearing, and it's going to be in Hebbronville again. So that's going to be another week. So I'm getting really anxious by this time. So Yuri tells me, he comes up with this bright idea, and at the time I guess I thought it was okay because I thought that this was taking a long time. He said, let's make a deal with Price where he gets rid of Oscar and we let him off the hook, and that way you can go see your uncle. And I said, no, I said, I don't want to make a deal with Price. I said, it's not right. And he said, no, he said, we need to make a deal with Price, and then we can deal with him later. So he convinces me. So then what he does, he has a meeting with Price in Kingsville, and he finds a private spot, and he lets Price listen to himself on that 30-minute tape recording. And Price was ready to deal anyway, because he knew he was in hot water. Well, when he hears that tape of himself, which he didn't know he had been taped, he's twice as ready to make a deal. So then, consequently, what we're doing, Carlos Martinez, the man that was going to be the legal guardian, is in on it. Yuri is in on it. I'm in on it. Price is in on it. Oscar Osuna, the gate guard, and Carilu is in on it. And their lawyers are in on it. And one of Price's colleagues is in on it. And this is a secret deal. All the other lawyers are cut out of it. They don't know anything about it. So we all have mediation on a Sunday evening down here in the valley. And the mediation starts out, and Price and his colleague, they want us, me and my sisters and I, to buy Oscar out, buy the 3 trustees out and all their powers. And we said, no, we're not going to do that. They need to be bought out, but we're not going to do it. So what they wind up doing at mediation, and we all agreed on it. It took a long time, as you can imagine. They take $2 million. Now, Oscar has Robert's power of attorney. Robert is still alive. So what takes place at this meeting, Price and his colleague bought Oscar, Carilu, and the gate guard out for $2 million of Robert's money. And Oscar getting most of it, Carilu got a part of it. And I think the gate guard, we bought him out. And with buying them out, we're buying all their powers too. So, who authorized that? Oscar was the only one that had Robert's power of attorney. So I guess he must have signed his own check, or somebody had to sign approval to withdraw this money to get all these people bought out. So that was accomplished there. And then that next Monday, we show up at the courthouse in Hebronville, and these other lawyers are just furious because there was something went on behind the scenes, and then everybody kind of left out in the cold. So Price appoints himself as trustee, and Carlos Martinez, and Ron Davidson. So now we have 3 new trustees who appointed themselves, and it didn't take long for Carlos Martinez to lose his loyalty to us and fall right in with these other two outlaws. And then, but we were able to go in the gate to go see Robert. So we go in, and Johnny, my son, had said he wanted to go see Robert, and I said, yeah, I think that's fine. Well, he got there before I did. When I got there, he was waiting outside. I said, have you seen Robert? And he said, no. I said, why? Well, they already had Chris Huff there, sitting there, and Chris Huff didn't want to let him go see Robert. They had already hired him. This is the guy that's game warden. They already hired him for the same thing to continue that we had been fighting for, just the right to see Robert and make sure he had medical attention. So anyway, and there was one other individual I left out that had seen Robert. My cousin, Helen Groves, had this geriatric doctor. I think I'm pronouncing it right. It's a doctor that looked after old people. His name was Dr. Burns from New Braunfels. And they wouldn't let him in, but finally she got him to agree to let him in. After the first hearing in Hebronville, they allowed him to go in, and he went to see Robert and everything. Said he made a report, said he was malnourished and everything and all that. So anyway, that very first day, that Monday after that hearing in Hebronville, and we went out there and they had Chris Huff there guarding Robert. We all kind of met there at the same time, and there's Paul Price, Dr. Falcone is there, Dr. Burns, the geriatric doctor, is there, and Ms. Groves had another doctor friend of hers show up there, and I'm there, and Letty's there, and I think Carlos Martinez is there or something. So these doctors decided they all kind of checked on Robert, and they decided that Robert needed a feeding tube, which 3 or 4 weeks earlier we had discussed this with Dr. Jetta Brown. And what did she tell me? She told me that she read Dr. Robert's directive and that he didn't want a feeding tube. They just wanted to die. So guess what these guys do? This after when these doctors confer and they decide Robert has a feeding tube, Chris Huff had his laptop there, and they said, well, pull up Robert's directive. Pulls up Robert's directive. Guess what the directive said, what they all decided? Robert did want to be hydrated. He did want a feeding tube. So they called the ambulance, hauled him to Rio Grande City, but it was too late. It was already too late. He was there a day or 2 days. He was there long enough for Paul Price to have somebody come over and get DNA samples from him to make sure that the next of kin wouldn't pop up out of somewhere and be a thorn in their side, because saying that they could claim part of Robert's inheritance. He was there long enough for that, and then they sent him home to die. And that's my gripe with Paul Price and this Wildlife Foundation. With the Wildlife Foundation, that they have Paul Price there, who is responsible for all this that was done to Robert. He was the main orchestrator and wasn't willing to spend any money for Robert's medical needs. But now he's up there drawing probably a size of, he was trustee for a while. So we went and complained to the Attorney General, and there were some changes made, and they got rid of Ron and Carlos, but he stayed on. And he's still there drawing salary. And I have expressed that concern to Neil Wilkins, along with there should be money given for cancer research. And none of those things have been done. And I feel like Paul Price should be fired and not be sucking money off of the Wildlife Foundation. And I conclude my story with that.